Holidays are usually pretty straightforward, right? But Good Friday, that one's always been a head scratcher for me.
Mhm.
We're talking about a day that marks a crucifixion, a somber occasion for sure, but we call it good. So in this deep dive, let's try to untangle that, see if we can uncover those layers of meaning that make you stop and think, never thought about it that way before.
It's fascinating, isn't it? How can one single day hold both sorrow and hope, It really makes us confront some complicated ideas like sacrifice, redemption, and faith, the kind of stuff that stays with you.
Absolutely. And speaking of things that make you think, you guys sent in a ton of great questions for this deep dive, many around the name itself. Because honestly, Good Friday, it does kind of make you go, huh. I mean, when you consider the historical event we're talking about here, the crucifixion good doesn't exactly come to mind first, does it?
You're hitting the nail on the head. At first glance, it's a bit of a paradox, this name. But once we start digging into the origins, that's when things get interesting. Linguistically speaking, the word good might actually have come from older terms like holy or even God's Friday. It gives us a little peek into how people viewed this day centuries ago, you see.
So we're not really talking about good in the sense of like a party or a celebration. It's more about acknowledging a deeper meaning, maybe even a sacred one.
You've got it. That's where those layers of meaning come in. For a lot of people, the goodness is about what they believe Jesus' death represented. This idea of atonement, of the ultimate sacrifice making redemption possible. It's about seeing beyond the actual event itself and focusing on the larger spiritual narrative.
Which leads me to think about how Christianity has so many different denominations and practices. So I'm guessing Good Friday isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of observance.
Exactly. While the crucifixion is central for everyone, the ways people observe Good Friday vary a lot, across denominations and even geographically. Some people observe a strict fast and attend solemn church services. For others, it might be more about processions, reenactments, or unique traditions passed down through families.
It's like this day becomes a mirror, reflecting all these different beliefs and practices, even within the same faith. Okay, so we're talking about this idea of goodness tied to what sounds like a pretty difficult day. To really get that, I guess we need to back up a bit, right? What exactly led up to Good Friday, to the crucifixion?
Right, it's like you said earlier, we need to understand the story so far. It'd be like jumping into the last few minutes of a movie, you'd be totally lost. Jesus's arrest and trial, the crucifixion, it wasn't just like a random Tuesday. It all came at the end of his teachings, his run-ins with the authorities, all those things that build up the tension in a story.
I see what you're saying. When you think about it like that, it becomes about way more than just the historical facts, right? You start to see these universal themes, the kind of stuff that still resonates today, like standing up for what you believe in or going against the grain, even when it's hard.
Exactly. And that's really what gives this whole story, and Good Friday itself, so much power. It forces us to think about those timeless struggles we all face as human beings. But then you add in the symbolism of the cross, and, well, it gets even deeper, I'd say.
That's what gets me. You have this thing, this object, and it represents something so brutal, but somehow it becomes this symbol of hope and faith for millions and millions of people. I mean, how does that even happen?
It really is quite a transformation, right? Think about it. The cross starts out as a tool for torture and execution, but then because of its connection to Jesus, it takes on this whole new meaning. It becomes this powerful image of sacrifice and redemption, of good overcoming even the worst kind of evil.
And that shift in meaning, that's got to be what takes Good Friday from a day of just mourning to something. Well, more, wouldn't you say?
Totally. Yes, it's about acknowledging the suffering, of course. But it doesn't stop there, does it? It also pushes us to see the hope and the love that many believe emerged from that sacrifice.
It's amazing how much there is to unpack about this one day.
Hmm.
But you know me, I like to get into the nitty-gritty, like okay, but how do people actually observe Good Friday kind of stuff? And let me tell you, the questions you guys sent in, wow. Fasting, feasting, fish. Where do we even start?
It really shows you how deep these traditions go, how they're all woven up with history and faith, even local customs. It's fascinating. Let's see, you asked about fasting. Someone wanted to know, is it really just about skipping a meal or is there more to it? And it can be as simple as that, sure. But a lot of times it goes way beyond just the food.
Yeah, that makes sense. Growing up, I remember some of our neighbors were really strict about fasting on Good Friday. No meat, no dairy, kept everything super simple. But it wasn't about, punishing themselves, It was about being closer to their faith, feeling connected to something bigger.
That's it exactly. Fasting, it can be about tapping into the spirit of the day, taking time to reflect, maybe challenging yourself a little. And it's not just that either. We got a question about the whole wearing black thing on Good Friday. Now, it's not something everyone does, obviously, but for those who do, it's a way to show they're taking the day seriously, a mark of respect.
Oh, and then there's the fish thing. That one always throws me off.
Hmm.
Why fish, of all things, on Good Friday? What's the connection there?
Right. It does seem a little out of left field until you get a handle on the history. See, in a lot of Christian traditions, people avoided eating meat, especially red meat, on Good Friday. But fish, now that became kind of a substitute in a way.
Wait, hold on. A substitute? How so?
Well, for one thing, people associated fish with Jesus, with his ministry. Remember the story of the loaves and fishes. That one. Plus, from a more practical standpoint, fish was easy to come by, especially in places near the coast.
Ah, so it's this mix of symbolic, meaning A and D practicality. Which makes me think, we've talked about how Good Friday is observed in different ways, even within Christianity, but what about globally? How does it all play out in different cultures?
It's amazing, really. You see so much diversity, even though it's a global event.
Hmm.
Take Spain, for example. They have these incredibly somber processions. Some people even dress up as penitents. And then you go to the Philippines and you see these intense reenactments of the crucifixion, very powerful displays of faith. And those are just two examples, you know. There are so many ways people around the world mark Good Friday.
Really makes you realize how something so personal like faith can be expressed in so many different ways.
It's really something, isn't it? One shared belief, but it takes on a million different forms depending on where you look. Oh, and speaking of unique expressions of faith, we can't wrap up without mentioning the 7 last words.
Right, those final things Jesus said while he was on the cross. It almost feels too personal,
Yeah.
like we're listening in on someone's last moments.
And yet, those 7 sayings mean the world to many Christians. Each one is full of these really deep theological and spiritual truths. Like, take Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Talk about a powerful message. Forgiveness, even when someone is hurting you in the worst way.
Wow. There's just so much here, isn't there? History, faith, tradition, and then your own personal experience of it all. It's a lot to process. So as we come to the end of our deep dive here, the big question is, why does Good Friday still matter? Why should this day, with all its weight, still resonate with people, even if they aren't religious?
You said it. That's the question that stays with you. And honestly, I think that's a big part of why Good Friday still fascinates people and even challenges them, don't you think? It makes you think about sacrifice, about forgiveness, about how humans can be both good and bad. These are big universal ideas.
Like Good Friday makes us look in the mirror a little, right?
Yeah.
Forces us to see both the compassion and the cruelty we're all capable of. Makes us wrestle with those really tough questions about life, death, faith, doubt. All of it.
Exactly. And sometimes it's in that struggle and that grappling that we figure out who we are and where we fit into the world.
Well said. This deep dive into Good Friday has been a real journey. We've gone from the very beginning, the origins, to the symbolism, to all the different ways it's experienced, and we've seen just how much power this day has to move people, to make them think. But more importantly, it's left us with some questions that hopefully stay with you long after this is over. What does Good Friday mean to you? Do you see those themes, those ideas we talked about playing out in your own life, in the world around you? Those are the conversations we want to spark. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.